Okay, folks, so let's talk about Venus retrograde. We talked a little bit about Venus retrograde, actually more than I intended to, when we did the last video on the full moon in Aquarius. And sorry about the backdrop. It looks like it's tilting. I don't know what's going on. It'll be fixed at a later time. Let's carry on. Let's talk about Venus in retrograde, and then after this video, I'm going to want to talk about Mercury in retrograde, because both these retrogrades are so interesting. And of course, Venus went retrograde on July 22nd or 23rd and goes direct on September the 4th. And Mercury goes retrograde on August 23rd, 24th, and direct on September 15th. So there's a certain amount of time, August 23rd to September 4th, when both planets are retrograde. Okay. Let's focus on the Venus side of things. Now, some of this I already touched on before, but let me touch on it once more because this is important and relevant. When Venus is retrograde, it is a time for, and again, I can feel some of you saying, I've heard this before, but let's since this is dedicated to this, let's talk about it. It is a time for financial reevaluation and alignment, and relationship reevaluation and alignment. It is not a time when opportunities don't come up. It is not a time, I really don't want anyone to confuse Venus retrograde with Mercury retrograde. When Mercury is retrograde, we like to, as astrologers and as people who understand astrology, try to halt as many transactions as possible or slow them down. Transactions could mean signing contracts, agreeing to things, taking on a lot in terms of travel or commuting or meetings or dependence on technology, or all transactions now have something or the other to do with technology. Well, that's Mercury retrograde. With Venus retrograde, I'm going to address what happens when opportunities come up, because that was the word I used to describe the last full moon, opportunities. But the larger question, the more important question with Venus retrograde is, are my finances aligned with where it is that I'm trying to go, particularly my expenditures? Am I overspending? Am I working extra hard to maintain a lifestyle that is somehow preventing me in ways that I may not be aware of, or may not be cognizant of, or may not have thought about, from going in the direction that I want to go in, or pursue what I want to pursue, or pursue primary goals or a primary goal? And when planets like Mercury and Venus go retrograde, it is that idea of not being aware of something that comes to light, that we get to reflect on. One of the ways in which Venus does this is to create a sense of financial tightness, or an awareness of a feeling of concern around, do I have enough? What do I need? Why is money going in this direction and that direction? And overall message is, where are you headed and where are you looking to go? And what are you trying to achieve? What is close to your heart? What are your goals? What is your vision for yourself? And what does your financial expenditure and income, but especially expenditure, look like? So are you working to manage your expenses, or are your resources actually supporting the direction you want to go in? So that's the first thing to look at. And the reason why I think that when Venus is retrograde, opportunities do come up is because even if they don't last or stay after Venus goes direct, or if there are modifications that have to be factored in, it's those kinds of opportunities that make us think about, well, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Am I staying in this? Am I pursuing this goal still? As part of this, you could be reevaluating your goals. Is this still important to me? If this is going to mean, and when we're talking about Venus, we're talking about a very natural flow. We're talking about comfort. We're talking about luxury. We're talking about, Venus is not a planet that encourages hardship or is about hardship. Venus is about bounty. But one of the things with Venus we kind of have to look at is, am I too comfortable with the way things are, including expenditure, including relationships? And is that comfort keeping me from going in the direction that I want to go in? Do I become a little bit more ascetic or ascetic, depending on how you pronounce the word? Do I become leaner, meaner, austerity? but a healthy austerity. You know, in a certain sense, you know, you could almost argue that one is healthier when one is, it's a little bit like resistance training. You know, when you have the if you have a lot of ease, unless you are extraordinarily disciplined, it's harder, the motivation, the incentive to go after what you want and create the life that you want that is ideal to you is harder than when you have the comfort, because that comfort sort of becomes this anesthetic, this thing that you become used to. So I'll take I mean, this is not, these things are very relative because people could have health issues or personal problems so these examples don't work for everyone. But, you know, it's a little bit like, I remember when I first moved to Los Angeles from San Francisco, I was walking a lot more in San Francisco, even though I had a car. It's the nature of the city. It's the nature of where I lived and where I could go to grocery shopping. It was the pain of parking. I did not have a garage in San Francisco, so it meant street parking. So once I had parked, I was very reluctant, unless I had to really, there was a strong reason to drive, to give up my parking spot. Because if it meant that luckily I had grocery stores and things around me. So the bottom line is, I was leaner as a result of the physical exercise that I was doing. Once I moved to Los Angeles and I was much more car dependent, I noticed that I became less healthy. And so it's one of these things where the comfort of something, the convenience of something somehow kept me from being in a certain space in terms of at least the way I looked. Now, the reason why I said this is relative is if someone has health issues, if someone has back pain, if someone has trouble walking, if someone needs a car, clearly, you know, those are needs, and the example doesn't work for everybody. But it is this example of having a certain amount of resistance. And the question to ask is, where have things become so comfortable in terms of where the money's going, certain relationships, certain things that just sort of happen subconsciously? Where are we cotton-balled? Where are we cocooned? And how is it preventing us from going after what we want? Financially, expenditure, and relationships. And both the opportunities that can sometimes come up. And I would especially think about, you know, when Venus was going retrograde, July the 22nd or thereabouts. You can look back to that date and just kind of pay attention to what was coming up around that time. It could be that it is opportunities. It could be that opportunities come up around the time when Venus is retrograde that force you to think about, these issues, that first and foremost force you to think about what is important to you and what might be coming up, what these opportunities are, and if you were to take them, what might be coming up. So how do you have to plan and organize yourself around it? So what does that mean for you financially and relationship-wise? And secondly, some of these opportunities may have something to do with past people and relationships where you may need to give things a second look. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't avail of the opportunities, but there may be something here that needs to be figured out. Now, with relationships, it's a very similar thing. In fact, you know, I don't know which as part of Venus retrograde is more painful. Is it the poverty consciousness, temporary, because Venus is going to be direct on September the 4th, or is it the relationship breakup aspect? And by that I mean any relationship. I'm not talking about just romantically, or with Venus retrograde. One of the words I use for Venus, and I think I might use this for this video, is acrimony. And I mean that relationships that we instinctively know are not serving us or have become problematic, even if they were close and supportive at one point, fall apart. Venus retrograde does this thing where she weeds out and collapses relationships that are preventing you from going where you need to in a peaceful and Venusian way, where your sense of self-worth and where your sense of self-confidence is not compromised, and so anyone who, you know, is falling in the camp of competitiveness or envy, anyone who is falling in the camp of, well, it comes from the same place, right? Anyone who doesn't have your best interests at heart, or doesn't necessarily want to see you happy or successful, or those kinds of things. When Venus is retrograde, it really it's like the truth rises to the top. And you might find actually that when Venus went retrograde July the 23rd onwards, you found that it was easier for you to detach from certain relationships, or Venus retrograde may just kind of create these conditions or bring up things or arguments or things to the surface that cause these breaks. Now, when personal planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, are retrograde, one of the important points in this retrograde process is when the planet conjuncts the sun. So Venus has been going ahead of the sun is moving, Venus goes retrograde, and at some point for us on, oh God, when does this happen? This is, on August the 13th. On August the 13th, people, on August the 13th, Venus retrograde conjuncts the sun. August the 13th is about 8 days, a week from now. The most intense part of the Venus retrograde is this time period between July the 22nd, but especially as you get to that August 13th date. So pay attention to what is coming up that could, it's almost as the universe says, do you really want this? Do you really want this? Here's some opportunities. Here's some stuff. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want that? Well, this is what you need to do in order to function, to be able to get it. This is what you need to eliminate in terms of financial habits, what you need to cultivate in terms of austerity, what you may need to do in terms of income. This is what you need to do in terms of relationships. And a lot of that evaluation, and especially as you head towards August the 13th, just be warned that things may come to the surface. I don't think that it's an opportunity thing as much as, because the opportunities, who doesn't want opportunities to look at, even if it's something that you reject ultimately? I think the important thing with any opportunity here is to really see and meditate on, first and foremost, the question is, where do you want to go? What is in your heart? And we're talking about Venus here. So what is in your heart? Secondly, with Venus, questions of self-worth and how that translates into leading an abundant life, and what choices we're making, and do those choices benefit us? How do we undermine our own self-worth, either by a certain type of decision-making, financial decision-making, or by who we choose to keep in our lives? Why do we choose to keep them? Where are our dependencies and codependencies? All codependencies are not bad things, but the codependencies where with people or with situations or with friendships where we know that the other person does not have our best interest at heart, but we may be ignoring it or not wanting to face it, those are the things to look at, because ultimately it all comes down to this point of self-worth. And what happens when you can act from a place of self-worth? How does the universe respond? Does everything fall down and collapse and become a disaster? And there are all sorts of reasons why people don't eliminate relationships from their life, especially there's an aura of fear around those relationships. Oh, what will happen? They'll do this, they could do this, they could talk about it, blah, 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 blah. So by all means, exercise appropriate care. But there's also the question of, if one acts from a place of self-confidence and one's own self-worth, then is the outcome, does the universe reward us in some way? Now, these are things that I would honestly say you should discuss with other professionals, therapists, legal professionals, if it's going in that direction, because I think that it becomes important for us to really think about our own evaluation of a particular situation, what our own learnings are for ourselves, what we're bringing to the table in these relationships. But the bottom line with Venus retrograde is, as we head towards August the 13th, and especially the next week and a half, we may really be forced to think about, we may really need to think about, situations may come up where how we need to organize ourselves financially, and the truth about certain relationships, and where we need to keep those relationships and how we need to manage those relationships may really come to the fore. They could be related to opportunities that have come up, especially if those opportunities are related to past people where you have question marks anyway. That does not mean that you have to negate or refuse the opportunity. It's just, in fact, I would say that unless pressed, wait to see where you end up with anything that is coming up as an opportunity till after September the 15th, if you can. So until Venus goes direct on September the 4th, and then Mercury goes direct on September the 15th, you know, that new moon in Virgo that we have on September 14th, 15th, is a lovely new moon. My only problem with that new moon is that the ruler of that new moon, Virgo, Mercury, is stationary. I wish it was just moving forward. But that's, as we've talked about the second half of this year, we've talked about it being a second half of this year of changes. But there's something about the changes where the momentum of these changes increases after September 15th and as we head into October. And once we get into eclipse land, middle of October, end of October, it is game on. Even the week before and after August 26th, 27th really needs to be paid attention to because it's 2 months before the lunar eclipse in Taurus on October 28th or so. So anyway, once we get to that point, I'll talk about that some more. Venus entered the shadow period on June the 19th. I'm going to give you this information at 12 degrees of Leo. And it went retrograde on July the 22nd at 29 degrees Leo. So it almost made its way through Leo, but it did not. And it almost conjuncted Mars, but it did not. The Mars-Venus conjunction that should have happened by, the end of July actually is going to occur in the sign of Aquarius, the opposite sign to Leo, on February the 22nd, 2024. So whatever it is that these changes, or whatever it is that this Venus retrograde is trying to create and if you were to look ahead with your vision, that is the date you're looking towards. That's the consummation that was prevented with Venus and Mars. We're talking about the female planet, the male planet. We're talking about them coming together. So whether it's relationship, whether it's opportunity, whether it's whatever. Now, that does not mean that opportunities will not manifest before then. But if there's a long-term vision or a long-term goal, what you're trying to do financially and in terms of relationships is you're trying to get there. You're trying to manifest something by February the 22nd, and that is what this Venus retrograde process started. So June 19th, Venus enters the shadow period. July 22nd, it goes retrograde. September 3rd, it gets back to 12 degrees of Leo and then goes direct. October 7th, the shadow period ends, and on October the 9th, it finally leaves Leo to come into Virgo. Both Leo and Virgo are very important signs for the second half of this year because of the way that they're supporting the Taurus eclipse on the 28th of October, which is the big eclipse that we're heading towards. I will end this video in a couple of minutes and we will carry on at a different date and I will add more color to it. As Venus, so we've talked about the importance of, and classically with Venus retrograde, the thing that I want to say in terms of opportunities, actually I may finish this topic in this video, even if we go to about 25 minutes. What I find with Venus retrograde is that if relationships, and particularly romantic relationships, come up during this time. Now, you could have met this person before, but if there's a flirtation, and you could take this in a professional context, you could take this in different contexts too. I find that if relationships come up, someone asks someone out, there's a flirtation, something like, while Venus is retrograde, I find that there's an intensity to it. But once Venus is direct, it somehow mysteriously disappears. It dissipates. Does that mean that you should be cautious? I don't know that you necessarily need to be cautious, because if it's something that you want to pursue and the other person wants to pursue and it's a mutual thing, then it's nobody's business, as long as you're aware that after September the 3rd or September the 4th, as you head towards October or into November, even before that, it may just go, it may just disappear. You may find that either the other person or you are simply no longer that ardent. So know that about Venus retrograde relationships. And I'm talking about relationships that initiate during this time. The same might be true of professional associations, except there the whole thing is a little bit more complicated, because if it's associated with where you want to go, Venus does dangle these carrots of opportunity to get you to think about what you're trying to create, in this case by February 22nd, and these opportunities to get you in this mindset of, well, if you go after this, then what changes need to be made? Who is aligning with this, who is not? What changes related to the way you perceive yourself and what you allow in your life, your sense of self-worth, what you ask for, how you communicate that, all that kind of stuff that we've just spent 20 minutes talking about. Venus retrograde is notorious for not making physical changes to your appearance, because after Venus goes direct, you may not want them. So haircuts and hair color can be fixed and changed, although sometimes it can last longer than you might like. But certainly things like plastic surgery, etc., classically, traditionally, are best avoided. Now, if you have Venus retrograde in your chart when you were born, I'm going to let you experiment with whether Venus retrograde time period is actually positive for you financially, relationship-wise, and appearance-wise, whatever that means to you. Okay, I'm going to plant that seed there. And finally, with opportunities, if opportunities come up while Venus is retrograde and you are not forced to commit to anything, you can just wait after September the 4th, and in this case, even after September the 15th. Whatever is coming up now, there's a lot. The retrograde that I'm more concerned with is the Mercury retrograde, because with Mercury retrograde, things really can slow down, and things really don't manifest that fast unless you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart. But if you're client and you do, we've already had this conversation probably. So if you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, that's when you are much more decisive and much more in sync with the world. In many ways, when Mercury is direct, you are not. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. This is a Venus retrograde video. But irrespective, I would say it's time for forward movement until August 15th and even until August the 20th or so. When Mercury goes retrograde, around August the 23rd, and when it goes direct, around September 15th, outside all the hullabaloo that on a mundane level that Mercury retrograde creates, the biggest question to ask is, what is coming to my attention? What am I learning that I did not know before? Since Mercury went direct last, I think in May, to now, as there has been a certain amount of forward movement, why is this Mercury retrograde important? What is it bringing to the surface that I was not aware of before? Even if it is extremely disappointing, because factoring, you may have thought that things were headed in a certain direction, some element of that expectation may be rooted in fantasy, and Mercury retrograde may go, well, you know what, it's a little bit like you're interviewing and there are 3 people who are proving something and you think everything's going well, and then all of a sudden as Mercury goes retrograde, you learn that one of those three people has their own favorite, or actually has the power when you thought that the other 2 didn't. And so then you know, it almost gives you a sense of, well, is this actually going somewhere, or is it not going somewhere? What does this mean? Do I put all my eggs in this basket, or do I not? What eggs do I have in this basket? Do I continue to keep both my feet there? Do I keep a digit there? What do I do, and how do I go about it? So Mercury retrogrades can be very helpful reality checks, even though they can feel like someone's just thrown a bucket of ice over your head. It's helpful though, so that you don't get carried away and start to build castles in the sky and think that something amazing is going to happen when it had no chance and you just didn't know about it. Similarly, with everything that is brewing right now in terms of opportunity, keep your hands on the steering wheel and your wits about you, because you really do want to be on the other side of Mercury retrograde before you sign contracts and before you agree to things and before you collapse them. And it could be that opportunities are coming up right now while Venus is retrograde and things look like they're moving in a certain direction. There may need to be adjustments. There may be things that come up both financially or relationship-wise, either related to the opportunities or related to what these opportunities might encourage you to be thinking about where you want your life to go and what goals you want to attain, that are worth just remaining chill about and seeing how things unfold. If someone pressures you, or you need to sign a contract or make a decision, etc., then I do think that it's worth it to have the conversations and ask the questions and make sure that things are clean from a relationship perspective and clean from a financial perspective and feel good and feel right intuitively. So that, and also the other part of it is that remain open to the fact that even if opportunities are presenting themselves, something about them is going to continue to shift and change. So even if there's an opportunity and you are nothing changes in your case. It could be that the boss that you are talking to changes, or teammates, or there could be other things that are being figured out because the Venus retrograde is affecting everybody. So it's a little bit of entertaining opportunities, showing up, testing the opportunities, making sure again that they're promoting the alignment that you want. What is the end game? What is it that you want? What is in your heart? What do you want to manifest? And are these opportunities in line with that? How do they make you feel? Do they feel right? And the rest of the BS that follows, just be patient and let Venus continue its retrograde thing. Let Venus conjunct the Sun on August the 13th. Let it go direct on September the 3rd. Wait to hear what comes up when Mercury goes retrograde around August the 23rd, 24th. Wait for Mercury to go direct on September the 15th, ideally. And then by the end of September, just see how things manifest. That Virgo new moon. Now let me come to this. Because there have been other transits during this time that have been really supportive of opportunity. Mars trining Jupiter, Mars in Virgo, trining Jupiter in, we talked about this when we did the full moon video just a few days ago. Mars in Virgo, trining Jupiter in Taurus, and getting ready to trine Uranus in Taurus. Taurus is the part of the chart where we need to lean into and develop. And shall I turn on the light? I should, because this is turning into a longer video than I thought. Sorry about the adjustment. And, I can't stand that backdrop and what it's doing, but we'll deal with that later. So Venus, when it goes retrograde, makes 2 transits 3 times. It squares Jupiter in Taurus, where Jupiter is trying to create a new beginning, and it trines Uranus in Taurus, where Uranus is trying to make you more authentic in what it is that you do in the Taurus part of your chart. Taurus is where the last of the Taurus Scorpio eclipses is taking place. It is on October the 28th. It is a North Node eclipse. So that means that is the direction in which we're supposed to grow and develop. And things are coming up to encourage that, hopefully. Depends on where Taurus sits in your chart, and where Leo sits in your chart, and where Virgo sits in your chart, and how all of that plays out and what narrative that they're constructing in your chart. You've got to figure that out. But with Venus, for example, Venus squared Jupiter. I'm going to give you these dates. Venus squared Jupiter first time when it was direct on June the 11th. It's going to square Jupiter while Venus is retrograde on August 22nd. And then it is going to square Jupiter one last time on 17th of September. Squares mean that the faster moving planet, Venus, needs to take some sort of action. Typically with Venus, we're talking about availing of financial opportunities, building bridges relationship-wise. Here's the thing from a relationship perspective. A Venus retrograde is often an angrier Venus, but it is still, ultimately when Venus goes direct, we're still going to need to deploy whatever we learn about our relationships while Venus is retrograde. It may well cause acrimony and antipathy and breaks and detachment from toxicity. That's what I wanted to say. But once Venus goes direct, you may reach your own point of equilibrium with regard to how you're handling these various parties. It may be a more healed space. The disappointment, you may be grateful for the breaks and the lessening of contact because you're finally being able to act on impulses and intuitions that you were already aware of that Venus retrograde has given you the ability to do. It's just that Venus retrograde can make the process a little bit painful. Irrespective, you need to lean into Venusian activities in the Leo part of your chart to allow Jupiter to create the auspicious new beginning in the Taurus part of your chart, and to allow Uranus to create a more authentic you in the Taurus part of the chart and a more authentic path for you. This is why, as long as the opportunity or opportunities that are coming up feel aligned with, as you evaluate them, if you react to it positively from a heart space, if you feel like it is taking you in a direction that you want it to take you in, and that's the direction that you want to go in, if it's a step in the right direction, this is why I would say don't toss it just yet. because there may be more opportunities that you don't know where this stuff is going just yet. There are more adjustments. Now, as Venus is retrograde, as it conjuncts the sun, if things come up that are disappointing or problematic, or you start to see where the challenges will be, just see how you can act in such a way that you can appropriately decide to lay your cards on the table or not. How you're just going to need to watch and see where things go. And if ultimately something that felt like it aligned no longer aligns, or no longer gives you happiness, and you haven't signed anything or you haven't committed to it, you can let it go. As I said, the opportunities could come up to help you activate the Venus retrograde energies of getting your financial act together and getting your relationship act together. So just wait and see. I would not write off anything, but I would maintain a healthy and happy skepticism. Yeah, or just a kind of, this is interesting. I wonder if it will continue to feel this good or be this right. You know, it could be someone offers you something, and then as you head towards August the 13th, something comes up and they're like, well, we were thinking of this, or we said this, but can you come in again, or whatever it is. And at that point, I would just be like, interesting. You can choose to go and continue to avail of the opportunity. But if it emerges that things are coming up, or truths are coming up about what this might mean financially, or how you need to get your act together financially or relationship-wise, you can then see whether this is actually something that's going to continue to hold over the next couple of months, or whether it is something that is acting as a prompt for you to clean house, relationship-wise or financially, or get your financial ducks in a row. July the 2nd, August the 9th, and September 29th is when Venus squares Uranus. July the 2nd, Venus is direct. August 9th, coming up, Venus is retrograde. September 29th, Venus is direct. So, just look at this, guys. The Venus direct, we're still dealing with Venus in its shadow period till October the 7th. And Venus still makes a really important transit at the end of September, September 29th. I really think that the moving forward, we've got Venus squaring Jupiter for the last time, September 17th. We've got Venus squaring Uranus for the last time, September 29th. During this time, Venus will also trine Chiron in Aries. Aries is where the North Node has just gone into. Aries is where we had the eclipse on April 19th of this year, the North Node eclipse. So something about this process, something about this Venus retrograde is just critically important to opening up the right path for you. There's a really important healing that is occurring. A healing of whatever wound that is in the Aries part of your chart that has been holding you back. And it's part and parcel of this work that needs to be done. Through the Leo part of your chart, to create the new beginning and to create the path and to solidify and cement it in the Taurus part of your chart. If I were to take the zodiac signs out of it, I would say that this Venus retrograde is really trying to get you what you want. And so you've got to now do the challenging work of just really listening to Venus and seeing where it goes. It could be creative projects. We're talking about Venus. It could be beauty. It could be you. It could be even how you look. You don't have to make any changes to your appearance while Venus is retrograde. But once Venus is direct and you incorporate everything, you might have a better sense of who am I and how am I presenting myself to the world. This is especially true for Leo rising folks who have Venus is in the first house. But in general, we talk about Venus and we're talking about appearance. This could mean if Venus is in the fourth house for you, that would be Leo's in the fourth. So then Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, for Taurus rising people, home, land, real estate, the relationship with the mother, but especially home, and really, what needs to be done to kind of change it or beautify it, or, again, just hang on until Venus goes direct and then make the final changes and tweaks based on everything that you're learning, for example. On July the 24th, Venus trined the North Node, one day after it went retrograde. So again, would not surprise me at all if some opportunities showed up, or the opportunity for opportunities. You heard about something that you should apply for, like a job, or you heard about a property you should apply for, or something along those lines. This is why I'm saying don't negate opportunity with this Venus retrograde. Keep moving forward. Really hit the pause button if Mercury is direct in your birth chart and you get to about August 20th, and see what that August 23rd to September 15th Mercury retrograde brings up in terms of details. That's the time to look at the details and to hit the pause button. On July the 27th, about a week ago, a retrograde Venus conjuncted Mercury, the planet of thinking. You could have had important communications around that time come up. You could have been thinking heavily about how to align finances and relationships in the light of some sort of opportunity or something that came up maybe a few days before as you headed towards the 23rd. And also pay attention to who in terms of relationships showed up. Sometimes it's like things that show up like a bad penny. It's things from the past coming up to be processed. One thing I wanted to say about Venus. When Venus is direct in a certain part of the chart, she gives us, this is a general reading, so it's different when Venus is going through the 12th house than when Venus is going through the 3rd house. 3rd house being one of communication. Venus does try to grant us sweetness, beauty, harmony, diplomacy, thoughtfulness, courtliness. Ultimately, if you were to say, Abhi, what do I need? How do I use Venus in Leo to support the changes that Jupiter and Uranus are trying to make in Taurus, and to support the healing that Chiron is trying to make in Aries, and to allow the chart to move forward towards February 22nd of next year and manifest the changes that I'm looking for it to manifest? I would say while Venus was direct between June 19th and July 22nd, you may have found yourself business as usual and kind of amenably being in an old pattern. And part of that pattern may have meant being Venusian insofar as you were putting up, you were being genial, you were being kind, you were giving people second, third, fourth, fifth chances, you were putting up with crap, you were being a little bit passive, you were being understanding, you were being sweet, you may have been being spending more than you should. While Venus is retrograde, particularly this first part of the retrograde till August the 13th, allow Venus to help you retract that Venusian kindness. You do not need to be rude. You do not need to burn any bridges. If you find out that someone is not acting in your best interest and something happens, and sometimes with Venus retrograde, it's an argument, it's one of these things that's just bizarre, that just flies at the rails, but it's the emotional truth of the relationship that just comes to the surface because people are not willing to address it, and it happens irrationally. Then if the consequence of that is that you're taking a break from a person, then let that be what it is. But it could be detaching. If you have been in a certain groove financially and relationship-wise, after July the 22nd, you have the opportunity to get off that groove. The best way possible to deal with this acrimony or antipathy is to take the energy internally, get a sense of where you're going, pay attention to where the opportunities are, where you want to be by February 22nd of next year, and start to think about how you're going to align your expenses and your financial reality to support that. You might find that even with the initial days of Venus retrograde, you could have been in similar spending patterns, but you start to make commitments and start to see changes and start to see how you might find that somewhere during this Venus retrograde process, even in the next week or so, you are starting to align already because you're putting thought towards it. With relationships, it may simply be a withdrawal. It may be that you are not quite so easily in that groove of giving, but you may find that you're just like, you know what, I have wanted to, it's like lowering the volume on certain channels. I've wanted to lower that, and I'm going to do that. So I can see how I feel, and I can see if rather than being possessed by someone else. And it doesn't have to be romantically. It's basically anyone who's taking a certain amount of space and making you, anyone who is affecting your sense of self-confidence and your sense of manifesting abundance for yourself, your sense of self-worth. And you can start to dial those down. If it does not have to be a complete break, just experiment with that and see how you feel. When with Venus, however, there is a requirement and a request, especially, and this will become easier after retrograde Venus crosses the Sun, so it will become easier. You will start to be more integrated in your choices between August the 13th and September the 3rd. But after the September the 3rd, when Venus is going to square Jupiter and Uranus for the last time, it is very important to be your new Venusian self. A new you is born in alignment with where you want to go, in financial alignment with where you want to go, in relationship alignment with where you want to go, with greater clarity as to where your boundaries need to be with yourself and with others when it comes to these areas of your life, so that they support where it is that you want to go and what it is that you want. And you are not allowing anything, your own habits, expenditures, other relationships, the way you are in these relationships with regard to either sharing to, or whatever those things are that are sapping your energy and your self-confidence and not making you feel correctly good about yourself. There's a difference between people who try to help you and give you constructive feedback that is sensible, and from people from whom you can feel the energy of envy or manipulation. And some people just don't know how to be anything else sometimes. So look at this Venus retrograde as a rebirth, as a necessary realignment with where it is that you want to go. And we are entering the most intense part of this retrograde as we head towards August the 13th. Typically, Venus retrograde is a transit of poverty. It does not have to be, it may not manifest that you're feeling, so much depends on what house Venus rules and where the Venus retrograde is taking place. If your Venus retrograde, if you are a Cancer rising and Venus retrograde is taking place in your second house, or if Venus, or if you're Aries rising and it's happening in your second, if Venus rules the second house, or if Venus somehow rules the eighth house, if Venus rules the financial houses for you, or this retrograde is happening in the second house, then yeah, you may really need to be looking at your finances. If Mercury rules your financial houses, or this is happening in the second house for you, then that's the time you really need to pay attention to what's going on with your bank account. So, but the poverty aspect of it may have a lot more, and this is, I think, what people will connect to, is your financial house in order to help make the changes that are coming up for you to avail of the opportunities that get you to where you want to be by the time February 22nd of next year comes around. That's the financial awareness. I'm going to not use the word poverty consciously. You may realize that you may have an awareness of what it is going to take and what you would like to have in your bank and what you would not like to touch and how you need to get there and what you need to stop spending and how you need to. And it could involve other Venusian things. Where do you work? Where do you think? How is your office space? You know, when you walk into the environment where you're trying to manifest things, are they harmonious? Are they beautiful in the way that they need to be? Are they supportive to what you're trying to do? Is the office clean? Is the desk clean? Is there clutter? These are all Venusian things. Beauty, ease, flow. Are you lean and mean so that you can move in the right direction? After Venus goes direct, your approach is going to have to be that the new you starts to show up to these opportunities that have either already shown up or are moving forward in a way that is reflective of the new you that has learned and incorporated the lessons of self-worth, resolved to, started to, have already been making the changes financially and relationship-wise, so that the person that walks in the door when Venus is direct after September the 3rd is that much more embodied, self-confident, in touch with themselves, and that much more able to, in Venusian ways, able to say no and set the boundaries where they need to be. We're talking about Venus, we're not talking about Mars. It does not have to turn into a fight. It does not have to turn into a legal battle. It does not have to turn into verbal explosiveness, although some of that could show up or threaten to show up while Venus is retrograde right now. When Venus is direct, you emerge and you go into those rooms as the you that has reflected on where you want to go and what changes need to be made to support that, especially financially and relationship-wise, and in terms of harmony and beauty and grace in all the areas and environments where you are going to be creating that new reality that you want to create. And once Venus is direct after September the 3rd, even though you're going to be dealing with Mercury retrograde shenanigans till about September the 18th, the person that is doing the having the conversations and taking care of things and, you know, interacting is going to need to be a new you that has done the painful work of, and some of that new you is going to start to show up even after retrograde Venus conjuncts the Sun on August the 13th. Some of that new you is going to start to get constructed between August the 13th and September the 3rd. And you may find that you need to have a couple of conversations or a few things there that present you in a Venusian light, diplomatic, polite, but able to say what you feel you need to say, or realize where it is that you don't need to waste your breath. You may find that you need to be in the room to set boundaries, but you may find that you are experimenting with who this new you is. And again, as I said, you do not know where these opportunities are going right now. Are they going to hold after September the 15th or even after September the 3rd? Or have they just come up so that you can purge toxicity? You don't know that yet. It'll become clearer after August the 13th as you head towards September the 3rd, and even clearer after September the 3rd. And you might find after September the 3rd that if there's an opportunity that is linked to challenging situations or people, you might find that you are much more embodied and are able to handle those situations in a much more embodied way so that they bother you less, even if the opportunity seems really attractive to you. You may be that much more collected, that much clearer. You may have toned the volume down. You may know how to deal with person A and B and C and D. When earlier you were on some sort of a toxic groove with them, you may through this Venus retrograde be like, I'm just not gonna, no one can trigger me down the same path. No one can pick my pockets in quite the same way. Energetic pockets, emotional pockets, financial pockets. Because I have been doing the work while Venus is retrograde between July the 23rd and September the 4th, but especially till August the 13th. And now after August the 13th, I get to put these pieces in play and rehearse what it means to be the new me. And I might have to be in situations where I have to express that and be that. But especially after September the 3rd, all systems go. And Venus is a planet of luck and opportunity. She makes life easier wherever she is. Depending on the house, if Venus is in the 12th house, it's a very different energy than Venus in the 2nd house or the 4th house or the 5th house or the 10th house. Goodness. Okay, I hope you found this useful and helpful, and I hope this gives you a sense of where we're at. I'm going to the next video, and this is like more than twice the normal video size I do, you guys. So I'm so sorry. I would have broken it up, but I felt like all the information needs to be given to you. And so now you have it, and you can refer to it. Next video I want to touch on this Mercury retrograde that is coming up. I was looking at it, and it makes some fascinating. It is a Mercury retrograde that could make so many transits. 3 times. It could oppose Saturn 3 times. It could oppose Neptune 3 times because it's in Virgo. It could trine Uranus 3 times. But it doesn't. The only planet that it aspects 3 times is Jupiter. And Venus is aspecting Jupiter 3 times during this. And Jupiter is trying to create a new beginning, an end of a 12-year cycle, and the start of a 12-year cycle where Taurus is. And the one transit, the conjunction that Mercury is not able to make before it goes retrograde is conjunct Uranus. And just as it is ending its shadow period, it conjuncts, it's not Uranus, sorry. It is not able to oppose, it is not able to trine Uranus. It is not able to trine Uranus. Mercury goes direct. It's about to trine Uranus, but it goes retrograde. And then on the day its shadow period ends is when it trines Uranus. It is time to think about where you want to go, and it is time to clean house energetically. Right now with Venus, look at any opportunity that is coming up, any thoughts, look at your vision board, be clear about where you want to go, and make sure your financial and relationship houses, especially as you head towards August the 13th, and even if Venus retrograde brings up drama, look at who you need to be in that kind of effective, I'll call it lean and mean, productive, disciplined, aligned with yourself and what makes you feel good and what makes you feel like you're in the flow, grounded, humble, but clear about what is serving you and what is not serving you, and what is serving your path and what is not serving your path, and who is serving that path and who is not serving that path. That is the purpose of this acrimony, whether it is acrimony with ourselves around where our money is going, and oh my God, how can I stop that? Oh, I can't believe I'm doing this again. Or, no, this is not where, oh, you know what? If I'm going to avail of something like this, then I need to have this much in the bank to help make this happen, whatever that is, or certainly relationship-wise. If you found this video useful, you're welcome to comment on it, like it, all that kind of stuff gives it more traffic on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you have not, and if you subscribe, click on the bell icon, and over the bell icon there's a wiggling bell icon. Click on that so you're notified when I do new videos. Tell your friends about the channel, refer me, blah, 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 blah. All right, I will leave it at that, and until the next video. I've already given you a slight snapshot of this Mercury retrograde thing that we're going to talk about. See you guys soon.